This week's Parsha introduces a very interesting, kind of interesting concept, right? It talks about the Jewish people getting from Hashem that it's time to leave. Here's what's going to happen, the final plague. We learn about the final plague, and all these things start to go down. And essentially, Hashem instructs Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron and the Jewish people in regarding the calendar. Okay, so we're introduced to the idea, to the notion of creating a calendar. Okay, so he says HaChodesh Hazeh lechem. So Hashem is about to take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, and the first thing that's done is establishing a calendar. Okay, so this is the first mitzvah according to Rashi. Okay, and Rashi in the very beginning, Rashi is a famous commentary in the 11th century. He's one of the early Rishonim, and he was basically every commentary in the Tanakh, almost the whole Tanakh, the Gemara, Rashi's commentary is there, right? The Ashkenazi Rishon. And essentially, the very first entry of Rashi, which is in Parshas Bereishis, Rashi says, why does the Torah start with Bereishis, the beginning? In the beginning, the Hashem created, right? Why does the Torah start with creation? If Torah is Malashon Haira, meaning lesson and laws, we know that Torah is considered the book of law, so then it should be a collection of laws. Why doesn't the Torah start with HaChodesh Hazeh lechem? That's a good question, right? Like, if the Torah is about mitzvahs, this is the first mitzvah. Start the Torah with HaChodesh Hazeh lechem, not Bereishis bara Elokim. Now he goes on to explain. He says, now, mind you, this is 1,000 years ago. He said this. He said, one day, the nations of the world would come and say to the Jewish people, you are thieves. You stole the land of Israel, and you're thieves. And so Hashem gave us the aliyut of starting the Torah with Bereishis bara Elokim, which explains how the world was created. Right? The Torah starts by introducing the creator of the entire universe. And you follow the order of events in the Torah. Eventually you get to the point where Hashem gives the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Okay? This isn't a political thing. This is Rashi 1,000 years ago. Okay? He said one day the nations are going to call us thieves, and this will be our answer. So this is Rashi's explanation. But it's interesting to note, so last week I mentioned that according to Rambam, who's a Sephardi Rishon, maybe less than a century later than Rashi, maybe, and he says that the first mitzvah was introduced in last week's Parsha, which was Yedias Hashem, to know God. So how is it that we have two kind of contradictory ideas? Shouldn't be a surprise, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions, as the saying goes. So essentially, the reason why is because as it pertains to man's relationship with Hashem, first there needs to be a relationship with Hashem. So mitzad the person themselves, the first mitzvah is knowing Hashem. The first thing you have to do is know Hashem before you can, care about carrying out His mitzvahs and His laws and what He wants from us. So they're both right. So the Rambam says that's the first mitzvah, and Rashi brings that the first mitzvah is the HaChodesh Hazeh lechem, creating the calendar. So what was the calendar? The mitzvah was that we're being brought out of Mitzrayim, and we're going to celebrate Pesach, right? Passover for the first time. And during Passover, we bring a korban, we bring sacrifice, and there's the collecting of the omer, the crop, the barley. And in order for Pesach to be carried out properly, that crop has to be brought. So for future generations, every year Pesach has to happen in the spring when that crop is growing, right? So the world generally goes by a solar calendar. and the Muslims go by a lunar calendar, and we, the Jewish people, we do both. We have a lunar calendar as we celebrate the beginning of every month. We call it Rosh Chodesh. So the first day of every month we celebrate, and then we go according to the moon, right? The 15th day of the moon, if there's a Yom Tov on that month, most cases, it's on the 15th. It's on the full moon. The full moon is the 15th. Then the 29th or the 30th, the moon goes away, and then we count the new moon the next day. So how is this done? There are several days. There's several opinions, but generally speaking, we accept that we used Re'iyah, sight. They would have witnesses. People would see the new moon, and these witnesses would come and testify to the Beis Din, to the judges, to the Rabbanim, the rabbis, and they would, say, we saw the new moon. So the idea of this new moon and calculating the months, it's important that we calculate the months, and we do that by Re'iyah, but it's also important that we calculate the year, the seasons. So not only are we given the ability or taught how to establish a calendar as it pertains to the months, but also that we're given the responsibility to even dictate where months fall, right? And so the way they would do that is, if it was getting to be the month of Nisan, which is what this month was, the first month that we were taught was the month of Nisan, which is the month that Passover falls, and we were told to bring in Pesach during spring. So if it's getting towards Nisan and that crop isn't growing, they would add a second final month, right? The last month of the year is Adar, right? Which is March generally, right? It's associated with Pisces. And if it was going to be that the month of Nisan was going to fall too soon, and it was cold and the crop wasn't growing, then the Chachamim would establish that this year is a leap year for the purpose of giving the crop time to grow, so we can do it properly. So he gave us that power. Okay, so that was our job. So we were tasked with establishing the calendar, the months, and the year based on the Yom Tov, and making sure that everything fell according to the way Hashem designed it. So in the Sikha from the Rebbe for this week, he explains several concepts by bringing a question. What's the significance of Rashi noting this mitzvah to be the first mitzvah? So he points out that to say that this is the first mitzvah, right, doesn't just mean it was the first one that was introduced as it pertained to our geula, our redemption from captivity in Mitzrayim in Egypt, and then being brought to be given the Torah, which was the whole purpose of everything, was to follow Hashem's will. So we start celebrating those mitzvahs, or following those mitzvahs as they pertain to that time. So that was the first one. Okay. But deeper than that, when you say something is first, it means primary usually, right? It's the primary mitzvah. So now we really have to understand what Rashi's saying. How could this be the primary mitzvah? There are so many mitzvahs that are vastly important. Why would Rashi be saying that this is the most important mitzvah, the first primary mitzvah, right? It says because this mitzvah teaches us three things about the Torah. Teaches us about the way that the Torah was given, teaches us about the power of the Torah, and it teaches us about the purpose of Torah. So first off, Ibn Ezra notes that in the Chumash itself, we just see HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, to establish the months, the head of the months, and the year, right? We're not given details regarding the leap year, the adding the month. We're not given any details about how the moon looks and what to do. We're not given any details in the Chumash, but this isn't so surprising. The reason why is because anybody who is familiar with Torah observance knows that the mitzvahs are usually quite vague in the Torah itself, and so we were also given the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition. Okay, now it's interesting. There's a pasuk in Kisisa, a few parshas from now, and it says Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, write down these words. It says, because according to these words, I am establishing my covenant with you, with the Jewish people. So we understand this to be an allusion to the two forms of Torah. We have the written Torah and the oral tradition that was handed down that became what's known as the Talmud. What's interesting to note, though, is that it says, Ksav lecha, write for yourself, es hadvarim ha'ele, these words. This first hadvarim ha'ele, these words, is obviously an allusion to the written Torah, because it says ksav lecha, write for yourself these words. So these words in the first reference are clearly the Torah, the written Torah. Then he says, for because of these words, he repeats, right? Ki al pi hadvarim ha'ele. So this is the second mention of hadvarim ha'ele, these words. This must be on the oral Torah. But the rest of the pasuk says it's because of these words, the second set, which goes on the oral Torah, that I establish my covenant with the Jewish people. So how can we say that? In fact, the nations like to point out that we emphasize the oral Torah, the Talmud, over the written Torah, which is false. The oral Torah is an explanation on the written Torah and how to carry out the laws. But this is exactly what it means. When it says to put mezuzahs on your gates and your walls and your doorposts, how do you know how to do that? Right? When it says to have this be a sign on your hand and a symbol between your eyes, who does that? How could you know how to do that based on the written Torah? The answer is through the oral Torah, right? The tradition was handed down from Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai all the way down through the Chachamim and written down in the Gemara and taught by our rabbis and all the way to today. We're taught these things from the oral tradition. So when Hashem says, write these words down for you, for because of these words, meaning the oral Torah, I establish my covenant with you, is because everyone has access to the written Torah. Baruch Hashem, all the nations have access to the written Torah. But by seeing who actually carries out the words and the instructions and the directions from the written Torah, you see where the covenant is. You see what people the covenant is with. It's the people who are carrying out the details. And how do we know the details? From the oral Torah. So it's not to put to say that it's more important, chas v'shalom, than the written Torah. The truth is, sometimes we hold that a rabbinic decree is more stringent than a written one in some cases. It's not for now, but the idea is that it's through the oral Torah that the covenant is made obvious, that the covenant is shown, and that we actually know how to carry out the things that are prescribed to us that we have to do according to the covenant. So the first thing that we learn is the way that the Torah was given, the style of the giving of the Torah, is that the written Torah and the oral Torah were given together. We have no idea how to do the establishing of the calendar based on the written Torah. And what's interesting is we actually don't even have it in the Gemara. We don't even have it in the Gemara. This thing that is clearly a lesson in Torah Sheba'al Peh wasn't even written when our Torah Sheba'al Peh was first written down in the Mishnah or the Gemara after. It wasn't until Rambam, Moses Maimonides, the Sephardi Rishon as mentioned previously, he wrote the laws down. In fact, in the yearly cycle, who do one chapter a day of Rambam, Mishnah Torah, right now we're in the thick of the laws of the establishing of the calendar. So that's the first thing. We see from this mitzvah, the style of the giving of the Torah, that it has to be accompanied with the oral tradition to even know how to do the things in the written Torah. The second thing that's brought from this mitzvah is the power of the Torah. So what does he mean? So it's brought in the Talmud Yerushalmi that Hashem says, it says in Tehillim, okay, it says in Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, he says that Hashem, it says, Ekra le'elokim elyoin lekel geimer alai. That Hashem says to you, he says, Hashem, he says, to you, finish, he says, finish what I do. Okay? It's a rough translation without using the context. The actual words say to Hashem, finish what I do. So what we learn out from the Talmud explains that what this pasuk is telling us is that Hashem tells us to finish what He's done. Finish what He's started. Right? It says that the Dayanim, the judges, in Hilchos Dayanim, it actually brings in the Psukim that Dayanim are referred to as Elokim, one of the names of Hashem. Particularly the name of Hashem associated with creation and existence, right? Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning Hashem created. We use the name Elokim. And as I explained, I think last week, that Elokim is Gematria HaTeva, which means nature. So we see from the numerology of the name Elokim that the relationship described by this name is the notion of nature. Okay, so yeah. So what Hashem is telling us is that He leaves it up to man, to the Jewish people, to the Chachamim, to the Rabbanim, to finish and complete and be partners in creation with Him. Okay? It's a lot of pressure, but this is what had to happen. This is how it happened. And it brings an example. The example is like this. A young girl who is young, is a certain age, where if she loses her virginity, or if it's, it doesn't have to be from the act itself, but it could be from playing or riding horseback or whatever it is. If there's going to be the time of zivug with her husband, and there's not proof of virginity, right? Says that so why that matters is because the ksuba, right, the marriage document that guarantees her rights and her, if God forbid the couple has to divorce, how much she gets paid, and all of that depends on this particular thing. But there's also issues of marrying a priest. A woman who's not a virgin can't marry a kohen. So there's different reasons why virginity is important here. But it says that a girl who is young enough and loses it before a certain age, it will grow back. So what happens? A girl is 2 years old. She turns 3 in Adar, in the month of Adar. Something happens, okay? And she loses her virginity is not there. But she's 3 years old. She's already the age where it will grow back. It won't grow back, according to Torah. So what the Chachamim can do is establish a second month of Adar, which would then retroactively make her 2 years old. And it's not that we say that on a technicality she's considered as if her virginity is still there. We say that Davka, it's there again. That the Chachamim are given the ability to do whatever they can to bend the will, to bend nature to the will of Hashem, and to do everything they can for the sake of humanity. And this is an example. Another example I heard in a shiur from Rabbi Yonason Perry. He said that a young boy, let's say he's a minor, right, and say he is guilty and of something, of some avera, and is obligated the death penalty. He is obligated to have the death penalty. If it's Adar, and the rabbis establish that, this year we're going to say it's a leap year, they add a second month of Adar and make this young boy, this young man, retroactively a minor. And now they don't try him as an adult. So it's the nakuda here that's brought is that the Chachamim, and by extension the Jewish people, have the ability to change nature, to bend nature to the will of Hashem. It's an incredible power, and this is the power. This is what Hashem is giving us, and this is what it means by this mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh lachem, which deals with making a leap year and making all of these halachas. gives us the ability to see the power of Torah. Okay, and the third thing that we learn out from this mitzvah is the purpose of the Torah. The purpose of the Torah. So it says, if we say that they were basing the new moon, the new month, based on seeing the moon, they'd see the new moon and then they would, go and testify into the Beis Din that they saw the new moon and now it's a new month. It wasn't until the Beis Din actually said the words Mekudesh that they actually declare it a new month. So the Chachamim were literally given the ability, but what they say is Kiddush, right? HaChodesh HaChodeshim, to say that to sanctify, to make something holy. So the Chachamim, the sages the Rabbanim are given the ability to make the month holy. And it's not until they say it and they declare it so that it actually becomes that way. So, why this mitzvah? Why of all the mitzvahs did Hashem use this mitzvah? He could have used, the Torah could use another mitzvah to describe all of these three nuances. So, the Rebbe explains, because the purpose of the Torah, the purpose of creation, the purpose of mankind, of humanity, of the Jewish people, is to make this world a place for Hashem. By sanctifying this physical world, right? You take a physical thing, take the hide of an animal, and you make tefillin with it, or you write a Torah on it. You say a bracha on food. We are given the ability to sanctify the physical world. We're given that ability. And why time? Why is time the way that he shows this to us? It's because time is the first of all creations. Hashem started so when Hashem created existence and creation, really, He started by creating time. And so this physical world, this world and this existence that we live by, that we're familiar with, is measured by two things, time and space. So in order for that to exist, He had to create time and space. So by giving us the ability to recognize time and to be able to control time and sanctify time, He's showing us that we have the ability to sanctify all of creation. Every single thing in creation, we are given the ability to make it holy, to dedicate it to Hashem and to connect it to Hashem. And that's our job. That's our duty. And He does that by showing us by the most seemingly impossible thing to actually have any influence over. And that's time. And He gave us the ability, the literal ability, to sanctify time.